Welcome to the DFS Build NBA edition for Sunday's two-game slate. We did not think it was possible, but here we are in the 2024 NBA playoffs with another two-game DFS NBA slate. It was likely to be over, but it's happening. This is the last one, though. After this, it's just showdown slates from here on out. When I'm able, I'll still push out videos for those. And then beyond that, we'll be shifting focus to MLB DFS. Looking forward to the NFL season. Probably put up some Dynasty season long content throughout the summer. And also, as the UFL season winds down, we'll touch on that too. So, I actually already put out my first UFL DFS breakdown of the season. Late to the show for sure. I get it. But obviously, we've only been doing this channel since January, and we've been mostly focusing on NFL, NBA, and MLB to this point. So, just getting our feet wet there a little bit, trying to help you out. As is the case each time we put out a video, and if that is the case, if we help you out, please give these videos a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Both those things help us out, help the community grow, and let me know that I'm doing something right and pushing you in the right direction. And like always, if that is the case, if any advice we give on this channel helps you out, please leave a comment. Let us know, hey, I got a takedown. Just let us know what your approach was and how we helped you out, and or just in general, if you did well, let us know. All right, so this is fun. We got two-game slate. This is the end of it. No more after this, so let's enjoy it. Let's get a big win. By the way, I'm using the DFS Hero lineup optimizer / tool. You can do that too, and you can also get a 15% off discount if you use our link in the video description below. All right, so the Pacers and Knicks are the first game. This is early in the day, 2:30 p.m. Central, so you're going to want to get on your research early. That's why I'm pushing this out at almost 10 p.m. Central on Saturday night, and hopefully it's beneficial. Pacers are 3.5-point dogs as they travel to Madison Square Garden in Game 7. This game is a 208 total. Of the two games on this slate, it is the more appealing. It's got the tighter spread, faster pace. The Pacers are the worst defense left on the board, and it's got the highest total. So in theory, if we're going after things that we want to see in DFS, this game has everything. It checks all the boxes. Now, historically, Game 7s can be a real crapshoot. Sometimes teams battle back. Look, the Pacers just whooped the Knicks, and here we are, Game 7. Very possible the Knicks just go slap them around at home in Game 7 to advance to go face Boston in the ECF. So that's possible, but it is what it is. Here we are. We got to play the slate we're dealt. And by the looks of it, this game is the one to stack. No ownership numbers are out yet, but that's okay. I'll just kind of give you any, if I can glean anything out of the projections and the way I feel about plays, I'll talk about that a little bit. But obviously, the ownership aspect you will just have to, adapt to as you see it throughout tomorrow. But yeah, let's start with the Pacers side. So Indiana, obviously, up top. You have Tyrese Halliburton, who's coming in with a 45-point fantasy projection at just 8.5K, 32% boom rating. He's in the optimal lineup 49% of the time. I got nothing bad to say about Tyrese Halliburton. The only thing I would say is that, he's really shown his ceiling to be largely at home in this series. But he did have 63 fantasy points in Game 2 at the Knicks. If it wasn't for blowouts in the last few games too, he would just have kept on wrecking. So I have no issues with Halliburton. He's been pretty aggressive with his shot. He had 26 shots in Game 3. He's had 34 plus real points in 2 games in the series. And he probably would have been well on his way to have that in a third game in the series if it weren't for a total housing. So forever blowout risk aside, Halliburton looks really, really good for his price tag. The only issue is there's 3 other really, really good high-end plays on this slate. So that should keep his ownership somewhat in check. And as this is the top game of the slate, he remains very, very much in play, and he is too cheap for what he can do. Next up, as far as projections go, Miles Turner comes in with the second best projection for the Pacers. That's pretty cool because he's only 6.5K. So I like that. I like that he's got a 29% boom rating. I like that he's in the optimal line at 46% of the time. I also like that he's been kind of crushing in this series. Despite all the blowout issues, he's had over 30 fantasy points in all but one game in this series. So he's had no issues with this matchup. He's shooting efficiently. He's getting 2+ blocks in each of the last 4 games. He's getting some steals. He's getting rebounds, assists. He's doing everything. So Pascal Siakam has been kind of coming up small in this series at times. So to see Turner be pretty consistent right behind Halliburton is nice to see. So he grades out as a really, really good play, good point per dollar play, really good per minute guy, 1.12 fantasy points per minute. So he honestly stands out as my favorite play from the Pacers right now without ownership to factor in. At 6.5K, he's just too cheap for what he can do for you. Siakam, again, is going to be pretty appealing. At 7.4K, his price has come down a little bit, I believe, from the last game. No, it stayed. Okay, so 7.4 last time, it was 7.5 the game before that, but it's been creeping down as the series has gone on because up until the last game, he had not topped 38 fantasy points in this entire series. So he really blew up in the first 2 games against the Bucks in round 1, and he just has not really had much of a ceiling in this series. That being said, he's been scoring okay. He's had 22 plus real points in 3 of his last 4 games in the series. Obviously, he blew up last game with 44 fantasy points. So he's a good play at 7.4K. I don't know if I really trust him to be, to deliver another blow up game and back-to-back games here. But there's nothing wrong with him. At 7.4K, you can totally get to him. Ownership will probably dictate what I do there. But I just prefer Miles Turner. You're saving 900K. He projects better. He's got a better boom rating. He's in the optimal way more. On a 2-game slate, can you play Siakam, especially if he's like super low owned? Absolutely. He is too cheap for what he can bring to the table. He's just not going to be a priority for me. So on the showdown slate for the Pacers next game and the last one, I was looking at Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Nembhard, and TJ McConnell, and I ranked them Aaron Nesmith, TJ McConnell, Andrew Nembhard. Guess which one of those 3 had the best game? Yeah. So that's just how it is, trying to predict these guys, these 3 specifically. Obviously, Nesmith and Nembhard start, and they are pretty good bets to play 30-plus minutes. Nembhard played 38 in the last game. Aaron Nesmith had 4 fouls and only played 31. I say only. I mean, like, these last 3 games have been blowouts, so he's only been playing like 24, 28, 31 minutes. He's had 4 fouls in each of them. So he's obviously out there to be pretty pesky as a defender, and then he's going to hit some shots if he can get going. But they're priced at 4.9 for McConnell, 4.7 for Nembhard, and 4.4 for Nembhard, 4.7 for Nesmith. So honestly, you could go with whichever one you want. I think ownership's going to dictate that for me quite a bit. TJ McConnell is so hit or miss. He's going to get about 20 minutes off the bench. And for every game that he gets 40 fantasy points like he did back in game 4, he'll get 14 fantasy points like he did in game 5, or 12 fantasy points like he had in game 3. And then last game he had 25 fantasy points. So for the price, almost 5K, he's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with him. He's decent value. I'm going to once again say I like Nesmith a little bit better because I feel like his minutes, he's going to give you more minutes. He has a little bit more upside as a scorer. And then Nembhard is the same case. If he's going to get 38 minutes at 4.4K, if we can bank on that happening again, then Nembhard's going to be the top play out of this trio. I'll just remind you again of what I just said, in that it's guessing which one of those 3 values for the Pacers is going to be the one to pop is kind of a big deal. So if I could predict it every single time, I'd be rich probably at this point. I would be getting takedown after takedown. It's just not an easy thing to do. I would just get exposure to all of them because they're good value no matter which way you look at it. It's just which one you land on with more ownership is going to decide how you do possibly, or at least play hand in it. As far as other value, Ben Shepherd, Isaiah Jackson, Obi Toppin, they're all getting minutes. So if you want to play them as punts, and even getting away from these problematic 3 Pacer values that I just talked about, you can, because they're decent per minutes guys, and they can do a lot in about 15 to 20 minutes, and they can pay off. So they're probably going to be leverage plays when you look at it that way. But Isaiah Jackson's probably the one I would first not use. He only had 12 minutes last game, 6 minutes the game before. So while he does a lot in a little amount of time, I just don't like the small amount of minutes he's getting. And second guy that I wouldn't want is Ben Shepherd. 3.1K, obviously the price on him and Isaiah Jackson is really, really nice. So if you want to pay all up for like Jokic and get like Brunson and just stack a bunch of guys on the slate, yeah, you can start entertaining pairing some these guys together or going to one of them or something. But Ben Shepherd has 9 fantasy points in back-to-back games, and he has topped 15 fantasy points one time, I think the entire playoffs. No, just this. Yeah, the entire playoffs. So there's no ceiling there, and he has a very low floor. So he should get about 20 minutes off the bench, and he's super, super cheap. So he is viable. But if I don't have to do it, if I don't feel like it's a necessary must, I will not play Isaiah Jackson and Ben Shepherd if I can help it. And same thing with Obi Toppin. Totally fine play. These guys are fine punts if you want to load up, be top heavy on this slate. I just don't think they're completely necessary. All right. So as a recap for the Pacers, love Halliburton. Nothing wrong with him. I just don't know if he's necessarily going to be a priority. But Miles Turner is probably going to be a priority for me on this slate. All right, the other side are the Knicks. Obviously, they have the more beneficial matchup. Their rotation's also a lot tighter. It could get even tighter because Josh Hart has an abdominal strain and he is questionable. He did not play down the stretch in the last game, but obviously it's kind of a little bit of a blowout at the end. So that explains that to a degree. OG Anunoby could be back, so we could have a swap here where Hart comes out and OG comes in. Mitchell Robinson remains out. So obviously if Hart and OG are both out, that just is monster minutes for Brunson, Hartenstein, DiVincenzo, Miles McBride, Precious Achiuwa. Those guys are going to play a crap ton. Alec Burks is going to play a lot, and then you could get some extra minutes for some of these just awful Knicks guys off the bench. But my guess is Tibbs would not deviate from the sicko that he's been all year, especially in the playoffs, and he will just run these guys into the ground. Worth wondering if the Knicks fatigue is actually finally taking a toll on them, but for DFS purposes, we don't give a shit. So definitely keep an eye on Hart's status, whether or not he's limited or obviously out, and OG Anunoby, whether or not he's limited or if he's just not going to play. So unknown, and we don't know also what the ownership looks like for any of these guys. So another thing that we'll want to factor in. That said, if Hart is in at 7.8K, he should play 40-plus minutes. He's a great per minute guy. I have no problem with them. Obviously, the fact that he was like in incredible pain in the last game and has busted in 2 of the last 3 games, I'm a little hesitant to be like super pot committed on him, or not pot committed, but to go in hard on him. But yeah, he's a fine play. Nothing wrong with him whatsoever. I just think at this point, if I'm in the Hart range, I would maybe just go up to, Halliburton. I'd feel a lot better about him at this point. So that's probably where I'm at with Hart. DiVincenzo looks great already anyways at 7K. He's going to play a ton of minutes. Obviously, he can get hot in this matchup. He's had some success in the first 3 games of the series. He had 35-plus fantasy points in each game. He's had 30-plus fantasy points in 5 of the 6 games of the series. So he's had a lot of success, and the blowouts have impacted him negatively to the point where if there weren't this many blowouts, DiVincenzo would be like one of the best players in this entire series, at least from a DFS perspective. So he looks really good at 7K. If Hart is out, he'd look even better. If OG's also out, DiVincenzo would be a core play to me. He might end up being that for me anyways, but I don't know ownership or anything yet, so I don't want to be handing out core plays left and right. But he looks really good. I have no problem with him. Isaiah Hartenstein is pretty close to a core play for me at 6.2K. This is a good matchup, obviously. These games being blowouts have hurt him too, but he's had some really good games. He had 44 fantasy points back in game 2. He had 37 fantasy points in game 5. And he was decent enough last game. And, he's been decent overall. He's had like 25, 26 fantasy points in other games in this series. So I don't have any real concern with him. I know he can win on the glass. I know he can score inside against them. So at 6.2, I'm willing to take my chances there. And obviously Hart and or Anunoby being out would just give him a little bit of boost, depending on what they do with their lineups, and let him stay out in the court a little bit longer. As much as I like the guys have already. Oh, okay. Also, Jalen Brunson. I don't feel like I need to waste any time on Jalen Brunson. He's pushing for a 50-point fantasy projection, 29% boom rating, showing up in the optimal 44% of the time. I mean, he looks great. He's got the second best projection in slate. The only real reason to fade Brunson would be that you love Anthony Edwards or you're paying for Jokic and you just don't want to stretch yourself too thin. I'm probably going to try to go 2 studs on this slate just because the value is just like a lot of good value. So I'm okay with that strategy. And Brunson is going to be one of them, I think. So pretty much borderline core play for me. That doesn't mean you have to play him. He's 9.5K. You can do other things for sure. Working online, though, core play for sure for me is Miles McBride. He is 4.8K, way too cheap for the guy that's going to start and play 35 to 40 minutes. Obviously, OG and or Hart being out would make that a screaming play. It'd make it way easier to feel good about. Precious Achiuwa at 4.5K would look a lot better if either of those guys miss. He's totally fine as is. If Hart is in, I'd be a lot less interested in him. Alec Burks at 4K flat. He's been playing 21 plus minutes in each of the last 4 games. He finally flatlined with only 16 fantasy points in the last game. I talked about that the last time I talked about the Knicks and Pacers and Showdown slate. I was saying, I mean, Alec Burks chalk. This just sounds bad, you know. I mean, he's been crushing with 25 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games, but when does Alec Burks chalk work? And do we really feel like that's sustainable? So if you listened to that, maybe that would have helped you in that showdown slate. I don't know. That said, he's really cheap. He has a role, and 2 of their perimeter players are banged up. So if either Hart or Anunoby are out, Alec Burks looks really, really good at 4K, and I don't really mind pairing him with Miles McBride at all because I still think he's going to get like 25 minutes either way. And the other Knicks punts, I really wouldn't entertain it unless Hart and Anunoby are out. And even if they are, I think the rotation is going to be super, super tight. And I would just feel better about Achiuwa and Burks at that point. All right. So honestly, we know the Knicks get, ground down by Tibbs. So they all look good. Just a reminder, Hartenstein's coming in 61% in the optimal too. So that even makes him look better than I was thinking in the first place. All right, on we go to Minnesota. Top projected players, Anthony Edwards, which should shock nobody. 44-point projection, 18% boom rate, coming into the optimal 40% at 9.4K. He looks like an instant leverage play on Jalen Brunson, assuming the ownership is where we expect it to be. I would imagine Brunson's going to be like 40 to 50% owned, and Edwards would probably be like 25 to 30. But on 2-game slate, you really just never know how this is going to shake out. So if you like Brunson, but you want to get a little bit different, Anthony Edwards could be a way to do that. Or if you like Brunson and want to pair another second stud like I want to do, Edwards could be that stud, and then you fade Jokic. That's possible too. So he's a really good play. He's been crushing in this series. 27 real points in a 45-point win last game. He had 2 43 plus real point games in the series too. So he's been cooking. I would imagine in game 7 he's going to show up. So you can definitely pay for him if you want to. Cat has been pretty chalky. He's been just fine. There hasn't been much of a ceiling there to get excited about. He had 51 fantasy points in game 2, and that's it. He's only topped 40 fantasy points one other time in this series. So that's 7.2. He's a totally fine play. He's a talented player. He does have a ceiling. But I mean, in theory anyways, we really haven't seen it that much in the playoffs. At their price points, I really much prefer Rudy Gobert. He is $800 cheaper, and he's getting like the same kind of production, really. 45 fantasy points 2 games ago. He's had 30 plus fantasy points 4 times in the series. So he needs to be out there with his size. He can rebound a block and get easy buckets and stuff. So I'm not really that worried about him at 6.4K. I think he's a really good play. The only problem is going to be you can only play 2 centers. So I love Hartenstein. I love Miles Turner. Obviously, there's Jokic, and then Rudy looks pretty good at 6.4K. So when it comes to that, I'm just going to trust the projections. And right now, Miles Turner projects better than Rudy, and Hartenstein is comparable. So then you're looking at, if you want to play 2 centers, you look at Hartenstein and Rudy. Who's lower owned? that's the guy I'm probably going to go. Depending on, if there's a large discrepancy. If they're both like pretty chalky, then it really doesn't matter. And if one is like 40% owned and one's like 17% owned, I'm going to play the 17% owned guy because then I get leverage on the field for a guy who projects similarly to a chalky guy and just hope that guy doesn't work out. Worst case, they both do well, and who cares, right? Then my lineup is just a little bit different than everybody else's. Moving right along, Mike Conley is questionable with his sore Achilles. He returned last time at 29 fantasy points. He's solid. I have no real opinion on a 5.6K Mike Conley. I would imagine in game 7 he's going to play and he'll show up. The only problem is he doesn't project really that well. He's only in the optimal 10% of the time, so it just doesn't feel like there's no ceiling there really. And he can have a floor to him. So I don't know. I just feel like I'd rather go down and eat some value and go get another stud rather than go so middle ground with Mike Conley. If he's like your last guy in, you could do worse. He can get you 25 to 35 fantasy points if he's hitting shots and it's working for him, but not exciting by any means. We start saving some serious cash with somebody like Jaden McDaniels, who popped off for 21 real points in his last game, which probably should tell us not to play Jaden McDaniels this game because he hasn't scored 20 plus fantasy points since April 23rd. And that was his first time since March 27th. He just doesn't score a lot very often. And in general, he's not a good points per minute guy. I mean, literally 0.61 fantasy points per minute on the year. Yuck. The only thing we like about Jaden McDaniels is he plays a lot of minutes when he's not fouling people and when the game isn't over by 45 points, right? So he had 38 minutes 3 games ago. Last 2 games, he had 30 plus minutes, even though they were house jobs. So for minutes alone and the fact that he's 4.3, totally viable. I have no issue going there. The only problem is I'm kind of expecting him to come back to earth after whatever that was he did in the last game. I don't really envision him being a beast like that 2 games in a row. So if he's going to carry crazy ownership, I would be underweight for sure. That said, still good play. Now it's rated at 4.2K. Depending on ownership, could be a pretty good pivot off of McDaniels. He's just going to play fewer minutes. He's going to play off the bench. Yeah, he'll give you 20 plus minutes. He's a way better per minute guy. So I do think it's quite possible that even though he would be on the court way less, he's just a more efficient player. So he's a decent bet to get more than Jaden McDaniels. Obviously, you're only saving $100 there. So I would really it depends on how the projections really shake out. And right now, yeah, I mean, like I said, actually, I didn't even notice that. But Nasri's projected for 23, and McDaniels, even though with all those extra minutes, is projected for 17. So that's an easy call for me. I suppose if the ownership is just really, really tilted Nas's way, and McDaniels is like just unowned, then we could bank on those minutes and then maybe leverage that. But in a vacuum, Reed is the better play to me. Nickeil Alexander-Walker came crashing down to earth with 12 fantasy points in 17 minutes in the last game because Mike Conley returned. So as long as Mike Conley is in, I don't have a ton of interest in him at 3.8K. I'd rather just go look at Pacers value or the Knicks value or, Nas or McDaniels here instead. Kyle Anderson, you get 10 plus minutes, maybe. I mean, did he benefit from the blowout last game? And Conley being out the game before? My guess is yes. So I wouldn't really be looking at Nah or Kyle or Monte Morris unless Conley randomly was out for this game. If that was the case, then yeah, those guys would be viable punts for sure. But I'm assuming that they should not be on our radar. All right, to the Denver side we go. Last team of the night. Obviously, the Nuggets are at home. They should be pretty motivated to show up after getting just completely destroyed. That was embarrassing, I'm sure. Jamal Murray is questionable, but he's been questionable for every game his entire life, apparently. He has not been great in this series. He had 2 good games where he had 40-plus fantasy points. Those were 2 games in Minnesota. Every other game, he's had 31 fantasy points or fewer. He has 3 games below 25 fantasy points. Apparently, something about facing Mike Conley routinely and him being a good defender. But yeah, his shot has not been there. 4 for 18 in the last game. The good thing about Jamal Murray is he's probably not going to be owned. He projects decently at 40 fantasy points, nice 30% boom rating. comes in the optimal 59% of the time, and he's 7.5K. I'm a bit of a betting man, so I'm very interested in what his ownership is going to be, because at 7.5K with all those other boxes being checked, Jamal Murray sounds pretty damn good to me. At game 7 at home, series on the line to return to the WCF. Murray's better than this. He's better than the gross numbers he's been putting out. So I would bet on talent, and I would bet on variance, and I would play Jamal Murray above the field if he's going to be even remotely low owned, for sure. I don't know why I started with Jamal Murray and skipped Jokic here. I feel like I don't really like talking about the studs that much because they're pretty obvious. You don't need a big sales pitch for Jokic. Obviously, he was horrible in the last game. I don't want to take anything from the last game for the Denver side. They just did not show up at all. But in most of the other games in the series, he's still been a stat stuffer. He's had 60-plus fantasy points 3 times. He's had 59-plus fantasy points 4 times. And even in the one game in game 2 when they got just destroyed, he still had 49 fantasy points in like a 26-point loss. So I'm assuming Denver shows up. I'm assuming Jokic has a great game. And at 11.3K, we know his ceiling. He's going to be very, very tough to fade. Very interested to learn what his ownership is going to be. But as things stand, I believe he has the highest projection. Let's actually double check that. Yes, he does. So he has the highest projection. He's got a decent 20% boom rating. He's in the optimal 23% of the time. He's a really, really good per minute guy, and he's had a lot of success in this series. So I'm expecting, him to be way above projections. Projections 53. I'm probably putting him at like 65 to 70. I definitely expect him to show up in this game. And if he's going to be low owned, I'll be very, very interested in getting on him, because honestly, there's a lot more value here than people want to admit. You could live in the mid range for sure with all the minutes the Knicks get, and just like the rotations in a game 7 are going to be a little bit tighter than we're usually accustomed to seeing. So I think you can definitely fade Jokic and get away with it. I just don't know if I want to, especially if he's going to be, not chalky. So we'll see what the ownership is like, and you can make that call. But right now, I don't think I want to fade Jokic. Fading Jokic at home in a game 7, that just feels not good. Aaron Gordon and MPJ are both really cheap. Aaron Gordon has been playing really, really well, even with blowouts, taking stats away from him. He's had 28-plus fantasy points in each of the last 5 games in the series. So he's been there when other guys have not. He's been pretty efficient. So there's always the chance that just stops, and then he's not quite as appealing. But 6.3K, the risk is low. If you want to play mid-range, like I said, you can definitely do that and use somebody like Aaron Gordon and not really be fearful of it. Just the ceiling isn't always going to be there is the thing. If you want to pick between him and Michael Porter Jr., he projects better just slightly, but MPJ is cheaper. And like I said, the projection is not very different. MPJ has a better boom rating, and he appears in the optimal twice as much. The thing with MPJ is it's a lot like Jamal Murray for me. I mean, I prefer Jamal Murray. I feel like he's a little bit safer, but MPJ has not been good in the series at all. He has failed to score in double figures in 4 games in the series, and he's failed to top 21 fantasy points in 4 games in the series. So it's been bad. But he's a good scorer. He's a talented player. So in game 7 at home, could he pop off and help them, advance to the next round? Absolutely, he could. At 6K, I have no problem being overweight on him. It'll be interesting to see what his ownership actually is, though, because he is a good player and he's not expensive. So I'll just keep an eye on that and adjust as needed. But he definitely should be in your player pool. And even though he's been struggling, and I would imagine there's a chance he's somewhat low owned because of those struggles. Value that looks pretty good for the Nuggets. KCP looks solid. 4.1K for a classic 3-and-D guy. If he hits his threes, he's going to smash that price tag. He does not do a whole lot out there, so not a great permanent guy. So, I mean, there's other value to be had, but his price has come down. So 4.1K for a guy who's going to probably play 35 minutes, that's pretty appealing. Also really like Christian Brown. He did not play very well in the last game, but again, nobody did. Before that, he was getting his minutes going way up. He went to 18, 25, 28 minutes, and he'd been producing and doing a lot of different things: blocks, steals, rebounds, hitting threes. So if he's going to keep his minutes for this game, Christian Braun at 3.5 looks really, really good. Justin Holiday, 10 plus minutes. Reggie Jackson, I don't know. Like if we're playing a showdown slate, I think you can get pretty serious about Reggie Jackson and Justin Holiday, and you for sure would want to have a lot of exposure to Brown and KCP. But on a 2-game slate, I don't think we need to go Justin Holiday and Reggie Jackson. And I'm not saying Christian Brown's a must either. But of those cheapies, KCP and Christian Brown definitely stand head and shoulders above Reggie Jackson and Holiday for sure. All right, so there's not much more we can glean from this slate as far as, piecing together lineups. We can refresh real quick over here at DFS Hero and then just run what they have. Give us, let's see what that was. I don't know. Let's see what they pop up for their optimal right now. Bronson, who I like. Nemhard, Neesmith, totally fine value. MPJ, especially if he's going to be low owned. I think MPJ is very interesting. Hartenstein, love it. Gobert, Reed, love it. Halbert, love it. So I'm fine with this lineup as is. Depending on ownership, though, if it ends up being like a really chalky build, then we'd want to get different in a couple spots. A quick one for me would probably be sliding Miles McBride in for one of these guys. And then if Gobert is mega chalk, maybe I wouldn't play Gobert and maybe I'd play Miles Turner, or vice versa with Hartenstein, maybe Miles Turner there. And then, if making those moves saves me up enough money to go from Halliburton to Anthony Edwards, or I could pay down from Halliburton to Jamal Murray, and then pay up over Rudy. You know what I'm saying? So make a few moves to get you different and go to plays that you really like that you think can work out. But this is just the first run with no ownership, and projections aren't updated, and we don't know for sure, the status of the two Knicks guys, Conley and Jamal Murray. Even though I think Jamal Murray and Conley are playing. The Knicks guys I don't have any idea about. So, anyways, that does it for me. Hopefully this helps you out a little bit. And once you can update everything, get ownership numbers, then you can start making decisions and build your lineups up. If this helps you at all, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, thanks for watching and good luck.